Is the example of Berlusconi in Italy a relevant one for the argument that businessmen don't make for good leaders? Let's explore. Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Freedom Alternative Research and Analysis. One of the latest arguments thrown around the politically active forums is that Trump would be a bad president because he's a businessman. When pressed on this matter, the example of Silvio Berlusconi, the former Prime Minister of Italy, is provided as proof that businessmen don't make for good leaders. In the face of such an argument, three obvious questions emerge. 1. Was Berlusconi a good leader or not? 2. Is Berlusconi's rule comparable to a potential Trump presidency? And 3. Is it even a relevant example? Okay, so let's take it step by step. Now, to understand whether Berlusconi was a good leader or not, we have to apply the Thomas Sowell test, namely to ask the three relevant questions when anything is asserted. So, the philosophical opponents assert that Berlusconi was a bad leader. Thomas Sowell test mandates that we ask the questions: 1. Compared to what? 2. At what cost? And 3. What hard evidence do you have? Now, it just so happens that Berlusconi's political career allows us to answer to the compared to what questions fairly easy. Berlusconi's first term as Prime Minister was very short-lived, less than 9 months, during the year 1994. Berlusconi won the elections then by promising 1 million jobs, and in order to win the elections he did something that no one thought it was possible, namely to approach the game as a game in a purely pragmatist fashion. Essentially, he noticed that there was no way he could win big as one political party because Italy was, and still is till this very day, a very divided nation with the more prosperous North and the far less prosperous South. But the differences between North and South go even further than that. The way people vote is completely different in the two areas, and by that I mean both their voting patterns and the way the voting system works, because Italy is a de facto federal republic, although most political leaders shy away from calling it that way. Anyway, so what he did was to create two electoral alliances. One was called Polo della Libertà, the Freedom Pole, and it included the controversial political party Lega Nord, or the Northern League, which still does exist, and it is referred to as far-right fascist in the European Parliament. Anyway, long story. The second alliance was called Polo del Buon Governo, the pole of the good government, which had as its main partner an even more controversial party, Alleanza Nazionale, which was the heir of the Movimento Sociale Italiano, which in turn was in essence the heir of the Republican Fascist Party. But Alleanza Nazionale and Lega Nord didn't quite like each other. Actually, they didn't like each other at all. So what he did, Berlusconi, was to not go full circle, and went into the election with his party, Forza Italia, as allied with two parties that were not allied with each other. And it worked. He got the highest score of any single party in the history of the Italian democracy. Now, there are a few reasons for which this didn't work within the government. One of them was the fact that Alleanza Nazionale didn't fully renounce its neo-fascist elements at the time. Another aspect is that Lega Nord was a bit too incoherent at the time, still fluctuating a lot between more reasonable federalist stances and far less palatable secessionist stances. Now, with internal contradictions plus smear campaigns from the left, eventually did collapse the first Berlusconi cabinet by the end of 1994. Nevertheless, during this short period of time, the first Berlusconi cabinet managed to facilitate adjustments into the labor code by bringing in some economically liberal elements into it. And it worked. 1994 was actually one of the few years of the 1990s in which Italy registered solid economic growth. In 1993, Italy's economy had contracted by 0.9%. In 1994, the Italian economy grew by 2.2%, and the growth got even better in 1995 to 2.9%. But then, as the leftists started dismantling even the tiny reforms that Berlusconi succeeded in introducing, Italy's economic growth slowed down significantly and only recovered in 2000. So, compared to what? Well, Berlusconi in 9 months of governance produced better results than his competition did in 5 years. And his cabinet even paid a political price for that, because while the reforms were good, holding that coalition together turned out to be a far more difficult task than expected. Anyway, fast forward to 2001, and here we have Berlusconi again running as the leader of the right-wing coalition La Casa delle Libertà, the House of Freedom, which was a genuine big tent this time, with Christian Democrats, Lega Nord, Alleanza Nazionale, and everything else non-leftist. His coalition gets 45.4% in the Chamber of Deputies and 42.5% in the Senate. For multi-party democracies, such a result is the equivalent of a landslide. It's almost the equivalent of Reagan's re-election. Getting over 40% in multi-party democracies like Italy is usually impossible. But then again, Berlusconi was at his prime and, as he was going to prove in the next several years, possessed an incredible skill at clinging to office. So he came in 2001 at another moment of crisis. Italy had joined the euro currency on January 1, 1999, but that didn't solve the fundamental crisis within the Italian economy. It had merely provided for a false boom in 2000 thanks to the artificial interest rates that the euro currency tended to bring in poorer economies joining the euro. The same thing happened in Ireland, by the way, and in Spain and in other places, but that's a whole different topic altogether. Anyway, so his main promises were economic in nature. He wanted to simplify the tax code, cut back on crime by increasing police patrolling, halve the unemployment rate, and increase the minimum pension to 516 euros per month. Well, he did eventually manage to raise the pensions to at least 516 euros per month. Crime did go down, and the unemployment rate wasn't halved, but it was at 9.1% when he took office in 2001, and it consistently kept on falling when he ran for re-election in 2006, when it stood at 6.79%. Now, Berlusconi himself simply said that his government was better than all the previous ones combined, and as much as I dislike agreeing with Berlusconi, he kinda had a point. His government did perform quite well, given the circumstances. However, he did lose the 2006 elections because of a weird electoral system that his own party wrote. Yeah, welcome to the Italian politics. Shooting oneself in the foot is quite fashionable. I guess I can't explain how this works to non-Latins. You see, there is a reason my own country has a similar flag with Italy, and it's not just our similar languages, but also our almost identical cultures. That's why when Italy had problems, Italians moved in droves here, and then when we had problems, Romanians moved in droves anywhere. There. Anyway, that's another tangent. So, as I said earlier, Berlusconi had an incredible skill at clinging to office. So while he did lose the election and the Romano Prodi cabinet was installed, Berlusconi didn't sit on the sidelines and doing nothing. He financed protests against the Prodi cabinet, which, let's face it, was a disaster anyway, and laid the groundwork for an even broader big tent called Il Popolo della Libertà, the People of Freedom. Berlusconi argued in 2007 that the voters are sick of being divided by the strong arming of the leftist cabinet and that the Prodi government simply wasn't representative anymore. And to prove that, he collected over 7 million signatures to a petition demanding the President of the Republic, Giorgio Napolitano, to dissolve the Prodi cabinet and organize fresh elections. Which did happen, and in 2008, Berlusconi was again Prime Minister, leading a coalition that had swept the leftist union once again. Now, this second cabinet, or maybe I should say third, since the one in '94 was the first, performed much poorer than the previous ones headed by Berlusconi, as everything that used to work in his favor turned against him, including and especially the global economic trends and, of course, the corruption scandals. This cabinet was dismissed in 2011 after a vote of no confidence by the parliament, which held it to him that he had failed to address Italy's debt crisis. Now, that was partially true. He did not reduce the debt of the nation, but he didn't increase it significantly either. That's the part that is routinely forgotten. Also, those who voted for his dismissal in 2011 soon ended up regretting it, because instead of snap elections, they got a new prime minister introduced by force by the EU, Mr. Mario Monti, who, other than serving the interests of Brussels and the German-based European Central Bank, did nothing else. While Berlusconi's forced resignation was at first applauded, quite a lot of those who did applaud soon shut up about it when they realized that no matter what you said about Berlusconi, the EU technocrat Monti was a billion times worse. Yes, Monti didn't bring young women to his mansion and didn't laugh at petty embezzlements on TV, but Monti would screw everyone with a serious look in his eyes and with no remorse of any kind. So that's essentially Berlusconi's career, the very short version at least. So, was Berlusconi a good leader? Well, compared to what was between '94 and 2000, and compared to the Prodi cabinet and compared to the Monti cabinet, yes. Was he perfect? Hell no. I mean, he was a clown in many moments. But in practical politics, you go to war with the army you have and not with the army you dream about. Also, he inflicted a far smaller cost on the Italian society as a whole in almost a decade as prime minister than the Monti cabinet did in 6 months. So, low cost, decent in comparison with the alternatives and with proven accomplishments. I'm sorry to say, but he kinda does pass the Sowell test. Now, mind you, Berlusconi also supported insane politics, such as being cozy with Recep Tayyip Erdogan, supporting Turkey's accession to the EU, or paying bribes to Muammar al-Gaddafi of Libya. In fact, on foreign policy, he got things wrong most of the time, so if you think I'm a fan of Berlusconi, please don't. I'm really not. But the facts are still the facts. Given what was available as alternatives to Berlusconi, the media tycoon simply was a good option. Now let's go to the other two questions asked at the beginning of this video. So, is Berlusconi's rule comparable to a potential Trump presidency? Well, the short answer is no, it isn't. First of all, the Italian system of governance and the American system of governance may very well be on different planets. They're so different that I have a hard time thinking of any substantive semblance between the two. For starters, the systems of checks and balances is much more fine-tuned in the United States than in Italy. Yes, impeachment of the president is difficult, but blocking the president from doing something is much easier in the American Congress than it is in the Italian Parliament. On the other hand, the Italian Parliament can purge a government easier, as votes of no confidence can easily be called. So, it's a matter of trade-offs. The civil law, or the Roman law type of system on which most of Europe runs on, has some things that are better than the common law system, and of course some things that are far worse than the common law system. Secondly, Trump isn't really that big on the US national stage when compared to how big Berlusconi was on the Italian stage. In order to get an idea, imagine if Trump would own Dallas Cowboys, the New York Times, CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News. Now, that's what it would take to make Trump in the US as big as Berlusconi is in Italy. This man owns the largest private media group and at one point also de facto controlled the state media group, RAI, thus effectively controlling over 85% of the media market in Italy. He also owns AC Milan, which is not only a very popular squad in Italy, but also an international brand, something which is kinda missing from the US team sports. I mean, everyone knows what AC Milan is and recognizes the logo. very few people really know what Dallas Cowboys is. Probably half of the people watching this video will have to Google it to find out. Sorry, but it's true. For these two reasons alone, the difference in systems and the difference in the sheer size and power of these two men, and it should be obvious enough that Berlusconi's rule is not and cannot be comparable to a potential Trump presidency. But let me give you a third reason: experience. And by experience, I don't mean it in the sense that pundits usually mean it when they cite experience. What I mean by experience is that the years he's spent in office influence the way one exercises the power in that office. If you really want to compare Trump with Berlusconi, if Trump wins, he'd be like Berlusconi in 1994. Mind you, Berlusconi entered in politics in January 1994 and became prime minister in late March that same year, and his cabinet lasted for 9 months. After that, he gathered experience, and then 7 years later he came back stronger, better, and more experienced. When it comes to Berlusconi, both his best years and his most controversial years are in the 2000s, when he already had experience. When it comes to Trump, if he becomes president, he'd be like Berlusconi in 1994, having a right there riding a thin coalition with a love-hate relationship. And that is usually shaky ground. But then again, the US is not Italy. The political system is just too different to make this comparison relevant. Yeah, and that's how I unwittingly responded to the third question as well. Is it even a relevant example? No, this is not a relevant example because it compares two completely different types of businessmen in two completely different types of systems. Now, if Trump had run in the United Kingdom, the comparison would have held much more weight because Britain's parliamentary system has much more in common with Italy, in spite of Britain not being a republic and in spite of Britain running on common law. For better or worse, Britain has adopted quite a lot of traditions, procedures, and elements of law from the main continent, whereas the US system pretty much broadly works very similarly to what the founders intended in the 18th century. Yeah, sure, there's the 19th Amendment and the various other progressive nonsense, but by and large, the US system has maintained a style of government that it is now simply way too different than what is customary in Europe, and particularly in Italy in our case. In order to make such a comparison, the comparison simply remains invalid, but even more so is not even vaguely relevant. And I guess that's it. I hope this responds to the argument put forth. I mean, seriously, people, if you're going to contest Trump, at the very least, try to contest him on things where he is weak, such as the incoherency of his economic policies or his coziness with Duginist ideologues. But this crap that he'd be a bad president because Berlusconi was supposedly a bad prime minister, even though he really wasn't, that's not fair criticism. And this is why Trump is still quite strong, because most of the times the criticism levied against him is simply stupid. So stupid that a 5-year-old can see through it. If Trump will win, he will win because his opposition is formed by fucking morons. And with that being said, thank you for watching and for supporting this channel. I'll see you soon on Freedom Alternative.